Good afternoon, and welcome to a new interview on editing, organized by the Textual Criticism Program at the University of Lisbon. My name is Inês Sá. I am completing my bachelor's degree in languages, literatures, and cultures, and preparing my application for the master's in textual criticism. I am joined today by Professor Nuno Medeiros, Professor of Communication and Culture at the University of Lisbon. His research focuses on the historical sociology of culture, with particular emphasis on the history of the book, publishing and reading practices, as well as print culture in Portugal in a broader Atlantic and post-colonial context. Together, we are pleased to welcome Professor Justine McConnell from King's College London. She is a scholar of classical reception whose work focuses on the interpretation of ancient Greek and classical texts in the African and Caribbean context. In addition to her monographs, Professor McConnell has significant experience as an academic editor. She has co-edited several major scholarly volumes, including the Oxford Handbook of Greek Drama in the Americas, Ancient Greek Myth in World Fiction since 1989, and Epic Performances from the Middle Ages into the 21st century. These works bring together contributions from multiple scholars and reflect a strong engagement with collaborative academic editing. Thank you very much, Professor Justine. I will now pass the floor to Professor Nuno Medeiros to start the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, indeed, Inês. Professor Justine, I want just to reiterate that it's a real delight, a treat of sorts. It's a pleasure having you with us in order to welcome you here in this forum for discussion and to be able to exchange ideas with you. Well, since I'm a sort of MC of questions, I would start by asking you, well, prior to joining King's College London, and we've settled this today, you held positions at Oxford and Northwestern. In what ways did these distinct institutional environments shape your understanding of academic publishing?
Hi, thank you so much. And just to say, it's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. So it's an interesting one, because in some ways, academic publishing doesn't seem to vary that much across at least the Euro-American world. It seems to me. I won't extend beyond that because I don't know so much about that. So the kind of beauty of that is that one doesn't need to be constrained by where you're based when choosing, where to submit a work for publication to some extent. At the same time, in the UK, for example, there is, I believe, a kind of greater emphasis on academic presses or on university presses if you want to secure a job or promotions and things like that. Now, that can be quite problematic, of course, and sometimes it's slightly daft. We all know of sometimes where there would be a very appropriate press that isn't a university press, and depending what you need at that stage of your career, you might have to kind of decide between the two. But it does remain the case that within the UK sphere, and I think this is across the board of the UK, it's usually a good idea for your sort of first academic book, at least, to go to a university press if possible. I think you have a freer rein after that for all the kind of obvious reasons to do with kind of getting your career underway. And from what I gather previously from being in the States, and I'm in the States right now as well, is that this emphasis on university presses is less of a thing in the US. So I think that could be fairly UK specific. And of course, it's very interesting to kind of have a sense of that range. And I guess it depends what you need for what will be most useful for you in that sense. I suppose there is.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Please.
One other thing that I was thinking of, it's sort of tangential perhaps to the publication aspect of that, but I think it all relates is that the kind of real benefit, in my mind, of working in a range of institutions, and it then ties into your publications, is the way that it expands your horizon. So in terms of teaching, research, and of publications. So you not only meet and collaborate with colleagues working in different areas who might be asking different kinds of questions, but you also have the opportunity to see the pros and cons of different pedagogical approaches. And that range of experience, I think, is really invaluable. And it allows you to kind of try to incorporate the best aspects from each into one's own teaching and into the research, and to kind of introduce us to new fields of study and new questions to be asked. And of course, the way you teach affects the way you research and the way you write and the way you publish. So that all seems to be tied in together to me.
So you have already more than scraped this theme in your answer, but considering the predominant emphasis on article publication and the dominance of journals in academic communication, particularly within the humanities and social sciences, as well as in academic evaluation and career advancement, as you just stated, what role do books occupy in this ecosystem? In other words, is publishing books, including monographic studies, still worthwhile, and why?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, isn't it? And it's one that one really encounters mid trying to write a monograph. You're wondering, why am I undertaking this great big work? So I'm going to stick to the area that I sort of know and have experience in, so the humanities, and in the UK and then the US to some extent, because I really, don't know much about the sort of social sciences of how it really works, but I do get the sense that it can be quite different, because we're getting closer to the way science works, where the monograph wouldn't make sense in the same way. So in the humanities and in the UK and perhaps the US environment, monographs for academic work, I think, are still crucial. So in the US, you won't get tenure without a monograph in most places. So the tenure of a permanent post, a thing that doesn't exist in the UK. But anyway, the blissful idea of tenure, you won't get it without a monograph. And in the UK, you'll kind of struggle to secure a permanent job without a monograph at least being under contract with a press. And likewise, again, in the UK, the publication of monographs remains a kind of key aspect of applying for promotions at each stage. So, lecturer to senior lecturer to reader to full professor, or if quite a few UK places have adopted the American, assistant professor, associate professor, and full professor. So in the humanities, we still want these monographs, but we kind of know about some of the issues. So what ends up happening is that peer-reviewed academic articles are also very important, but at least at my institution, we're encouraged to have the full gamut, right? So we ought to have a monograph or two, and we ought to have peer-reviewed articles, and really we ought to have public-facing pieces that will, appeal to a wider public as well. So the idea would be, I think, that we show that we can write across the full range of styles and to a full range of audiences. And, it can be daunting, obviously, right? So we're all just trying, it's not necessarily something that one can even find the time to do all of it. But I think also beyond those kind of slightly mundane practicalities of career advancement, the great benefit and pleasure of a monograph, of working on a monograph, and I think of reading it, is that it allows for that kind of extended in-depth study. So in terms of the topics covered, a monograph, I don't know, might be the equivalent of 5 or 6 articles, say, depends how long your monograph is, and your articles. But in the monograph, you get to interweave the threads, showing your audience how and why this all fits together. And that can be very rewarding, because as you weave those threads, you build them in your own mind, right? You become clearer about how this all connects together. And I guess monographs also helpfully kind of demarcate the scope of your research at that time, bringing it together as a whole rather than that more fragmented mode. So you then have a sense, and you can kind of show, this is what I work on. But at the same time, they take a very long time. And so it depends what your institution or whichever other demands on you, how much they're expecting you to publish and how quickly, because obviously a monograph takes much longer than a peer-reviewed article. And so, yeah, the two kind of jostle against each other slightly uncomfortably, I think, is my sense of it.
So apart from the book's instrumental role in securing a position, how do you view specifically the relationship between academics, your colleagues, for instance, or even your known institutions, and the book, including edited volumes, as a means of developing and projecting ideas?
Yeah, I think...
So I'm appealing to a more personal view on these matters.
So I guess I really like working on edited volumes, but particularly editing them, but also being in them, especially, well, if you're editing, I've actually only ever co-edited, which is a choice I would continue to make if possible, right? So you get to collaborate with colleagues in a way that we don't get to do so much in the humanities. So that's a real pleasure. It also obviously sort of lightens the load of editing, but it also means you've got people to bounce the ideas off, how should we be constructing this book? So it's a really lovely way to collaborate. And if you do it from the start, it can be very nice to work with colleagues, either that you're editing with, or you could set up, a workshop or a conference at your institution with the idea in mind that you might make a publication from this. And that means that all together you're kind of working together and shaping it, or you realize that a whole lot of you, my department, I'm now part of a rather large department of languages, literatures and cultures, where we used to have comparative literature and then a number of other, we had modern languages, so the French department and the German department and SPLAS, Spanish, Portuguese and Latin American studies, which were already merged. And what we've realized, of course, is that we all have many interests in common, even if it might not be evident if you looked at what our research areas were. So that can be a real joy to kind of do a workshop and think, okay, should we be making some kind of publication out of this, where we're all deciding where our kind of interests lie and kind of learning from each other. So it allows you to really, collaborate in a way that we're encouraged to do, I guess. But I think sometimes that slips away during the course of the academic year. Of
course. So if you could express that way, the book as a prime venue for academic collaboration, sort of, am I managing to get the gist of your view?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yes, I think so. And I think
thinking of edited books or co-edited books, Yeah,
and I guess the other thing that it does, it's a little bit like curating an art exhibition. So you say, this is the area that we're interested in here, and we think these things go well beside each other, and these ones talk to each other, and your sort of introduction and the cross references are a bit like the caption below the exhibits, and then the chapters are the exhibits themselves. And so it's not that it's the only way to do it, but it's a chance to say, hey, what happens if we look at the area from this view? And so doing that collaboratively, but kind of marking an area of saying, this is what we're thinking about this at that moment, is kind of how I see, at least, the edited volumes that I've worked on and that I've been in as well. It's often the case.
So now for a change of not scope nor even subject, but of angle, if you will. How do you think market factors, including target audience, sales potential, and international appeal, influence the framing of academic books, according to your own experience and reflection, of course?
Yeah. So, certainly academic presses have to consider sales. So the numbers might be small. They usually are quite small in humanities and in the academic world. But, the press needs to be sure that a book will sell and that university libraries at least are going to want to buy copies. So it definitely is a factor. And I think, generally, that idea of having to think about the market factors, and particularly, the target audience, and the international appeal, it's a good thing, right? Because one's topic might be quite niche, and academic writing, although it doesn't need to have the kind of wide-ranging appeal of the kind of books that you'll see in a bookshop, for example, although it's all to the good if they do, but we do need to communicate with audiences in a way that engages them and try and make it so that people are interested in reading the book. But I think that idea is where, again, what I mentioned earlier, any kind of firm distinction between teaching and research seems to me to be false. So just as, one wants to engage students when we teach, drawing the students in, enthusing them, hopefully, so too in one's academic writing, the writing benefits from having an audience in mind to some extent, at least. So I think it's quite a useful question to ask, and one that I'm learning to ask, but it's not always prioritized in academia, I guess, is, who do you envisage reading this? So what details should I include? What should I leave out? So that the audience both learns something from the book, but also enjoys it, right? I think it's important to make it readable and in a way that is going to be of interest to people. And I think that can tie in with what the presses are interested in terms of the target audience and the international kind of range. Sales is trickier, right? Because it seems to me a little bit beyond what the academic writer can fully take account of, and if we did, it could be a bit. I don't want to be an academic that's having to work in a way that's having to decide what is going to sell. I realize that's really idealistic, but I'm going to push it to sort of to the presses to work that out in a way.
Let's try to avoid that pitfall, right?
Yeah.
Major academic presses such as Oxford University Press, Routledge, Bloomsbury, Peter Lang, to name, of course, but a few, operate within both scholarly and commercial frameworks. Following this discussion, how does, according to you, this balance manifest in practice, according to your own experience, of course?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a really good question, and of course, I'll have a particular individual experience, so others might disagree, but on the way that I've kind of seen this happening, there are a few particular elements that have stood out. So if it doesn't sound too practical, university presses tend to be more flexible in terms of your time frame compared to the ones that have a large commercial arm. So the ones with somewhere like Bloomsbury, which thank goodness has a large commercial arm, because the story goes, Bloomsbury Academic is underwritten by the success of Harry Potter, basically, for which we can all be grateful, but it does mean that those ones are used to giving a deadline and will have a firm expectation that you'll meet it, which doesn't sound a terrible thing, but it does become a bit fuzzy, because for academics, unless you're writing a trade book, so one sort of fully commercial, rather than an academic book, you're not going to be being paid by the press at all. So your salary, your money is just coming from your normal job, and that means that you usually have a full-time job, probably in academia, if it's for sort of one of these presses, and so that you always need to prioritize, and that gets a bit difficult because, of course, your academic job does want you to publish, but my experience is that first and foremost they want you to teach well and do your admin and then fit in the research and the publication. And so the deadlines get a bit tricky because you obviously have to sort of prioritize the people who are paying you effectively, but I think the balance then is not too hard to strike. It's just a bit trickier. I think the thing is to be realistic with your first deadline. I'm terrible at this. I always massively, wildly underestimate how long it will take me to write something. Trying to be realistic.
Just say here.
Yeah. I think it's a trait that we can't get away from, right?
Yeah.
But trying to be realistic. adding a certain period of time of how long you think it'll take to it. And then just being really sort of honest with the press if delays come up, and just keeping them informed, because if you keep them in the loop, obviously that's the only polite thing to do, but I think it saves a lot of stress all around, because they're not meaning to pressure us. It's just that they're expecting the book, the monograph then, and then, we might get super stressed. But usually I've found that if you say, I'm terribly sorry, but this has come up, people will understand. But that kind of time frame thing seems to be one of the main differences that we kind of see. I guess another thing that happens with ones with a commercial arm that is really lovely is that they're, at least from the UK sphere, they're much more likely to publish in paperback after, say, a year, whereas university presses only usually publish in paperback if, in the UK at least, if you exceed the sales of the first print run, which is a very nice idea, but is quite tricky to achieve. Whereas if in a year's time it'll come out in paperback, it's then obviously affordable-ish, for people to read. The sales are better. It's more accessible for a lot of people. So I think that's something that's easier for these academic presses, but that have this kind of commercial arm to do. It's less common with some of the things like Oxford University Press. It's less common to have a paperback as well.
Right. So moving on, Inês has already mentioned you have co-edited several volumes, including, of course, the remarkable The Oxford Handbook of Greek Drama in the Americas. How does your perspective shift when transitioning from author to editor?
Yeah.
Is this a fair question to ask? Even.
I think it is. There's a pleasure in just being an author, because you don't need to deal with the overview in the same way. I mean, you might when the editor says to you, by the way, so and so's chapter's thinking of the same things. Do you want to read it? Do you want to incorporate it? But I think, usually when you're authoring something, it's usually in humanities, sole authored, isn't it? I've been quite lucky because I've also co-authored with a few colleagues, which is a nice way to write, but it happens kind of less often. So as I was saying, before, I kind of really like editing volumes, particularly because I've always done it as a co-editor. So that kind of collaboration rather than working alone is very enjoyable. And I do think it makes for better books. I don't mean that I look from the outside and say that's, edited by one person and it's not as good. But I mean that my experience of editing with other people is that we all help improve each other's work in that way. So that's very nice. There's a funny thing with sort of the editing of volumes. And again, this is the current UK academic framework. And so it might not be so relevant, I say optimistically. I don't know how it works quite on this scale, but edited volumes aren't very highly rated for the kind of things that we need to do in terms of, so promotion, editing a volume or a chapter in an edited volume doesn't have the same kind of weight as either obviously a monograph or as a peer-reviewed article, even though of course they are peer-reviewed, these edited volumes, but anyway, it doesn't have the same kind of weight. And without getting into too much nitty-gritty of UK thing, we have the REF, which if you've ever spoken to a UK academic, they will complain about the Research Excellence Framework across the UK. And it, alas, doesn't really count edited volumes, and yet we all need to produce a certain number of publications every tranche of time for this. So they're not highly valued in that way, but I do think that nonetheless, edited volumes are kind of crucial. So as I said, there's this sense of curating a book like you might curate an art exhibition. You're deciding how that field at that moment in time is going to be shaped, which pieces speak to which other ones, which gaps still need to be filled. And it's not just the collaboration with the other editors. You're obviously also kind of collaborating with the authors as you edit their work. So I was very lucky to be kind of effectively trained in how to edit by my PhD supervisor, Edith Hall, and my postdoc mentor, Fiona McIntosh. So I've edited books with both of them, and they, very generously kind of did this in the first instance as a way to teach me how to edit, which is something that I think, was a real kind of gift. And I've learned such a lot from them about what's required. So their view, I think I can say, certainly what I've adopted or understood from it, is that the editor should be quite hands-on. You're kind of serving as a peer reviewer in a sense with your first edit of chapters. It's your responsibility to build in the cross-references between chapters, for example. You're obviously responsible for making sure that the formatting is consistent, making sure that there aren't too many repetitions, so that if somebody were to read the whole thing, it will be building on each other. So there's kind of quite a lot of work involved in that way, but also, as it grows, you're kind of getting this lovely overview, a bit like you do towards the end of writing a monograph, except even better because several people have written it. So you've kind of got this idea of what lots of people are saying. And, in my experience, humanities can be a little bit solitary, the research. And so, as we were saying, that kind of chance, from your other question earlier, that chance to collaborate is just a real pleasure. And in a way that has like tangible benefits, right? The work becomes better with the way that we're discussing, and it becomes more interesting, and you think of more kind of things. So I think that's the kind of thing that you get to see more clearly as the editor. You have a sense of it as the author, but it kind of goes off your plate, and then the editor comes back and says something. Whereas when you're editing, you get to have a bit of a more, bird, is that the right expression? Bird's eye view. You know what I mean? You're looking from high up.
Of course, yeah. Because all the quibbling, all the back and forth, but at the same time, it's painstakingly, of course, but at the same time, you sort of building a unity, right?
Exactly.
And transforming and making an object, a coherent object, appear, right? And that's the I think that's the mesmerizing hue of all that, in my view, at least. It takes a lot of work, but when it's finished, all right.
Exactly.
It was worth it. It was worth it. So here it is. It's back to you, audience and critics and community and academia and whatnot. So much to dwell on and to address, but I have to steer clear of all the diversion. Now, for something completely the same as it's an old reference. I don't think our young viewers will get the gist of it.
I appreciated it.
Yeah. The large, right? In your view, what would be central features of the Anglo-American academic publishing market today? You were speaking of bird's eye, and I think your cross-Atlantic experience working in both margins of the ponds make you specially fit to address this, at least as an opinion, but well addressed one.
Great. Yes. No. And as you said in the question, I'm sort of slightly painfully aware that this is a very Anglophone kind of focus, but that is what I can speak to on these.
That's why we hired you.
Fair enough. Good. So I think we're really lucky that there are a range of publishers specializing in different areas. So despite the sort of financial kind of difficulties and things that academic publishing might have, we do have distinct presses with distinct kind of areas that they're interested in, or distinct book series. So you might not always pitch your book to the same publisher, because you might choose whichever one has the most appropriate series, or whichever one seems to have a particular interest in the kind of thing that you're also interested in. So sometimes, you know, an editor of a series might approach you as the author and ask if you would be interested in writing a book for that series. And that's a sort of slightly different thing, and probably comes, you know, not at the first stage of your career, because you probably need to have written the first book for them to do that. But, you know, you can have that. So this, for me, was the book that I did on Derek Walcott for Laura Janssen's Bloomsbury series, Classical Receptions in 20th Century Writing, came out of an invitation. So that's one way it's put before you. The other question, I guess, is, well, then how do I decide which press to send it to, which can be, you know, kind of a question. And I think some of what comes out of that is that, you know, if you're not sure, if it really isn't utterly clear where you should go, I would tend to look at which books I've been finding most useful, which do I keep using for this project. And, you know, because unless you're very focused on publishing, we don't always pay attention to who has published the book. But when you go back, it can start becoming rather clear. And so you say, okay, well, then actually that's who I should submit to. And I think this kind of range is really beneficial. So, you know, it means that you don't have to feel that, oh, I must go for this press again. You know, in what I work on, it was obvious with my sort of first book, the Black Odysseys book, that Oxford University Press's classical presences would be ideal if I could get the book there, because it's exactly the kind of thing that I work on. But, you know, as work has developed, there are other presses that would seem, or other book series that would seem more kind of appropriate. So for whatever that project is. So I think the sort of central features are the range of different presses that are available, and the fact that it's, you know, you don't have to, I don't think, with academic presses, write for a particular press, if you see what I mean. You don't need to change the way you're writing. It's more like there's enough of a range to say, okay, this will work well for this one. I think the sort of mode of writing is fairly similar across the board. And perhaps some of those ones that we were saying earlier, the academic presses with a more commercial arm, might be more flexible if you want to do a slightly more unusual style of writing. They might have a bit more flexibility, but the key is that because there's this range, we have quite a good choice, or quite a few options out there at any rate, it seems to me. And that's, you know, that's a real kind of treat for the academic, isn't it? I mean, it's still daunting when you send in your book and you hope it goes there, and it's okay if it doesn't. You can take on board the peer reviews, and you can send it elsewhere. But, you know, it's nice that there's that kind of range of them.
Changing a bit the course of this conversation, what are the major, if any, differences between an edited volume and edited special issues of journals for you?
That's a good question, actually.
Yeah. And
actually, I was slightly overlooking them in what I was thinking of. So I think edited special issue, or sort of editing a special issue can be quite ideal on a number of realms. So of course, it depends on the journal, but it's likely to be more accessible. It might not actually be open access, but it's more likely to have an online presence, which, if people have an institutional affiliation, they'd be able to access it. I mean, ideally, but the model is not fully worked out, but ideally they'd be open access in some ways. And with a special issue, I guess there are a couple of things. It comes out much faster, or it can, you know, because the monograph and the edited volume publishing through academic presses is slow once it goes in, whereas usually with journals, it can be a bit faster. But the kind of beauty of editing the special issue is that people who browse that journal, you'll bring in audiences that weren't expecting to know that they were going to be interested in this, which might not happen in the same way with an edited volume. They might not come across it. Whereas if, you know, people are, again, if I think of what I'd look at, and I'm on the board of the Classical Receptions Journal, we do some special issues sometimes. Now, some people will go and find that special issue because they're particularly interested in that topic, but also people who sort of subscribe to the journal will scroll through and find it. So they do tend to be a little bit more accessible, a little bit swifter, which has its benefits, both in terms of people needing publications for their careers, and also sometimes, you know, even in the humanities, sometimes we'd like things to come out a little bit quicker,
Yeah.
and it's of the moment,
Yeah.
you know. So I don't see any down. I guess if I'm weighing them up, I'm kind of seeing some positives of the special issues. I guess there's a joy in having, it depends what the journal is, there's a joy in having a physical book as well. And sometimes the special issues don't do it. I'm not sure that's a very academic response to say I like holding the book, and it definitely ages me to say I like holding the book. But, you know, there's that kind of mode. But I think, again, maybe it speaks to the range that we were saying. We actually do have quite a few options. And actually, special issues will often be a little smaller than an edited book as well. And that might be very appropriate if you've had a terrific workshop or conference, but a small one, maybe there are, you know, 6 people or something, whereas right, 6 chapters might be too few for an edited volume, mightn't it?
Right. Well, we're not far from the end of this conversation, at least in this venue and at this moment. But what do you think are the main challenges confronting academic publishing in the humanities today? This was looming in my head, you know. It was a question we had already worked upon. So what do you think the main challenges that academic publishing is confronted with relating to the humanities today?
So I'll say sort of what comes to mind for me, but I'd be really interested to hear what your perspective is as well, because it's a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds so mundane, but I suspect that the biggest challenge is financial, because the print run of academic books is relatively small, but they still need to be really carefully copy edited, proofed, typeset, etc. It's quite labor intensive for the run of it, particularly if one's thinking of print books. And then with the rise of open access publishing, which is certainly a good thing in terms of equality and breaking down divisions, you know, making it more accessible, we still don't seem to have a perfect solution from where the money should come from for that copy editing or proofing. So, I mean, at the moment, some people are saying, well, the author pays. That's a bit close to vanity publishing as well, you know, and how, you know, are we sure it's as rigorous in that case? And somebody's just saying your institution should pay. Well, that sounds very nice. Very few institutions are going to pay for it, at least on the current model. So I think how to navigate those kind of issues are there. And also, I guess it's what I touched on when I said or what was in my mind when I said I like the physical book. Certainly at my institution, I think many places, there's been a really sharp decline in students reading physical copies of books, or even being willing to go to libraries, even when the library is on campus. There's a sort of expectation now, and this isn't a kind of, you know, grumbling about the younger generation. It's just that they sort of came up through this way. I do it myself. It's like, oh, can I have it straight away via the internet?
Yeah.
And so that's obviously causing an issue, because at the same time, there's a financial strain if we expect everything to be online. And I think not that many, I mean, universities will do it, the libraries will, but would you pay the same for an ebook as you would for a hardback, because I personally wouldn't, and I realise I'm contributing to the problem in that way, of that kind of financial strain as well. I don't know what kind of issues do you think are really the biggest ones?
Oh, let's not even start. It's a bittersweet topic, right? Setting aside the predatory actors that are looming. For me, we have to come to terms, because we are normally at loggerheads with different logics, right? We need books to survive in social sciences and humanities in every aspect, and yet we face ourselves with a sort of materialization demise, if I will. I don't know if this concept is even a concept or a notion. I think there are so many paradoxical dynamics that I cannot fathom to wrap my head around it, in terms of what do I really want? Because I'm, as you said, I'm a paradox myself. Yeah. Oh, I should not state this in public, but there are some really good illegitimate Russian web pages that I'm afraid to say this in public, but often just come in handy in terms of getting access to. And what do I do? Because I study book publishing for 30-ish plus years, and this is not easy. I think there's a 2 or 3 pronged way that we are facing in terms of our own relationship, institutionally, personally, within the scope of the relationship with our students. Because they say, oh, please, Professor Nuno, but what should we do in terms of getting access to this book? Do you have some copies? Can you send it via email, or copyrights, ethics, consequences, possibilities? Well, this would lead to hours length discussion, but yeah, I don't tend. I really am with you on this, because it seems to me not daunting, but at times really challenging, because we are really, I think. Well, this is a cliche, but I think we are really at a crossroads in terms of our relationship with the place of the book within our careers, but within the institutions, with our own and career and paths as readers, our own readership. Well, I think we'll have to to live this up to a take 2, a round 2, hopefully, regarding these issues. Well, now to finish this with flying colors, I will give back the floor to Inês. Inês, if you please. It was a real delight, Justine, really, truly. Hopefully our paths just converge again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
I would like to ask you, Professor McConnell, What insights about academic publishing do you wish you had at the beginning of your career?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's kind of to the heart of things now, isn't it? Like, what do I need to think about now? So I was very lucky because, and I've mentioned before, but both my PhD supervisor and my postdoc mentors kind of advised and guided me about publishing. So it wasn't just the kind of the project and the academic project they had in mind. They knew I was hoping for an academic career, and they sort of had that in mind of publication as that. So I was very lucky to have that kind of guidance. And then in my PhD viva, the defense at the end of the PhD, my examiners also recommended where I should submit the project to as a book. And although I had a notion that I would want to send it to Oxford University Press's Classical Presences, I might not have been brave enough to if they hadn't discussed that with me, you know, in the viva. So I suppose that bit of slightly unhelpful advice is have good mentors, you know, who can guide you at each stage. But from what I gained from that and what I think applies now, the key points were thinking about which publisher to send it to and which series to send it to. So which is going to fit best for you? Where would your work fit best? What would be your kind of ideal one, you know? Because one might as well aim for one's ideal, you know, in the first place and see. So kind of working that out, and sometimes depending on your topic, it's clearer than others, you know, but I suppose one of the things is that, as I kind of mentioned, if you're not sure, then looking through kind of carefully seeing, okay, who's publishing the stuff I'm really interested in and the stuff that's influencing me, that's probably going to be a good place to go. And then one of the things is that sending to a kind of major academic press of some kind also has the enormous benefit of increasing the chances that your work will be really thoroughly peer reviewed. That might not sound like a benefit when one is daunted before you get the peer reviews, or even when you get them. You know, it can be daunting when a peer reviewer criticizes an aspect of your book. But in my experience, it always makes it much better. And of course, you'd much rather the peer reviewer pointed out any issues than somebody pointed it out once it's published. So I guess that kind of key point, and again, this is a little bit easier said than done. I'm not sure I fully achieved it yet. But getting peer reviews is a really good, helpful thing. You just need to not take it kind of too personally. Okay. And sometimes they might look strange. You might be like, that isn't what I was saying. That isn't what I meant. And of course, the answer there is, what did I? Occasionally you'll get a rogue reader, but usually, gosh, what did I do that made them think that? Let me adjust how I'm expressing this. So peer reviews as a kind of useful thing. And then I guess at the early stage, I think trying to move forward with publication quite quickly is a good idea. Usually when you've just finished a thesis, you've had enough of it, I think. But setting it aside for a little bit, but not too long, and going back to it and trying to get the kind of publication out while it's still fresh in your mind. You have that kind of pause, and then that can be very helpful. And then the one thing I definitely didn't realize until I was in it is just how long the publication process is. So depends on the press, but from the time of you getting the revised completed version back to them, like 12 to 18 months. Yes, you're looking suitably worried. It will depend. Now, in terms of like securing other things, that's not a disaster because people do understand that, and you can say it's under contract or whatever. But I had no concept that it could be as long as that kind of thing. So I think those kind of aspects would be the main ones that I think I didn't have when I began, but I kind of gained as I went along. So yeah.
Thank you very much. I learned a lot with this conversation. I think that brings us to the end of today's interview. Once again, Professor McConnell, thank you very much for your time and for sharing your insights. And thanks as well to Professor Nuno Medeiros for guiding such a thoughtful and insightful conversation. Thank you for listening. We look forward to having you join us for the next episode. Thank you very much.